The headlights of Hannah's sedan sliced through the darkness of the empty highway. She yawned, glancing at the clock on her dashboard. 11:45 p.m. A dull ache throbbed in her lower back from hours of driving, and her hands felt stiff on the wheel. She knew she should have stopped earlier, but deadlines loomed, and she'd pushed herself to get as close to her destination as possible. When the neon sign of a roadside hotel glowed in the distance, relief washed over her like a warm wave. The hotel was modest, a mid-range chain with beige stucco walls and a small parking lot. Hannah wasn't looking for luxury, just a clean bed and a quiet room. She pulled into a space near the lobby, grabbed her overnight bag, and stepped into the chilly night air. The smell of rain lingered, the asphalt still slick from an earlier shower. The lobby was brightly lit but eerily quiet. A young woman with curly blonde hair sat behind the desk, her head bent over a crossword puzzle. She looked up and gave Hannah a polite, if slightly bored, smile. "Welcome." "Checking in?" the clerk asked. "Yes, just for the night," Hannah said, handing over her ID and credit card. The clerk typed into her computer, her fingers clacking against the keys. Her brow furrowed. It looks like we're almost fully booked tonight. Let me see." She hesitated, then smiled again. "Okay, we have one room left. It's on the 4th floor. It's actually supposed to be unavailable due to renovations on that wing, but everything should be functional." Hannah didn't care. "That's fine. I just need a place to sleep." The clerk handed her a key card. "Room 428, elevators to your right. Let us know if you need anything." The elevator creaked as it ascended, its fluorescent light flickering faintly. Hannah's exhaustion grew with each passing second. When the doors opened, she stepped into a dimly lit hallway. The carpet, worn and faded, muffled her footsteps. A faint smell of paint lingered in the air, evidence of the supposed renovations. Room 428 was at the far end of the corridor. Hannah slid her keycard into the lock, and the door clicked open. The room was surprisingly clean. A queen-sized bed with crisp white sheets, a desk with a lamp, and a small flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. The only odd thing was the sense of stillness, as if the room hadn't been disturbed in years. Hannah dropped her bag by the bed and kicked off her shoes. She debated taking a shower but decided against it. Instead, she changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants, crawled under the covers, and turned off the light. The mattress was firmer than she liked, but it didn't matter. She was asleep within minutes. A soft sound woke her. At first, Hannah thought she was dreaming. She lay still, listening intently. There it was again, a faint, muffled whisper. It was so quiet she almost convinced herself it was the hum of the air conditioner. But the air conditioner wasn't running. Hannah sat up, her heart pounding. The sound seemed to be coming from the room next door. She glanced at her phone, 3:12 a.m. "Probably other guests," she muttered, though she remembered the clerk saying the floor was empty. As she settled back into bed, a new noise caught her attention. A soft tapping. It was faint but persistent, like someone lightly knocking on a door. Except it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside her room. Hannah froze. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from the closet. Her mouth went dry, and her pulse thundered in her ears. "Get a grip," she whispered. "It's probably the pipes or something." Summoning her courage, she slid out of bed, grabbed her phone for light, and tiptoed to the closet. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. With one swift motion, the closet was empty, save for a wooden hanger swaying gently on the rod. Hannah let out a shaky laugh, feeling foolish. She closed the door and returned to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The stillness of the room now felt oppressive, the shadows darker than before. The tapping returned. This time, it was accompanied by a faint laugh. It was high-pitched and childlike, but distorted, as if coming from an old recording. Hannah bolted upright. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The laugh stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Hannah grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. She scanned the room, her beam bouncing off the walls, the desk, the bathroom door. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, the unease in her chest grew heavier. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, a notification. She nearly dropped it in surprise. When she looked at the screen, her blood ran cold. It was a message from an unknown number. "Why did you open the closet?" Hannah's breath caught. She looked around wildly, as if expecting to see someone standing in the shadows. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely grip her phone. Another buzz. "Do you want to play?" "Nope," Hannah whispered, grabbing her bag. She didn't care if it was a prank or a glitch. She was leaving. The hallway felt longer than before, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows. As Hannah approached the elevator, she thought she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't dare turn around. She jabbed the elevator button repeatedly, willing the doors to open faster when she reached the lobby. The clerk looked up, startled. "Leaving already? There's something wrong with that room," Hannah said, her voice shaky. "I'm not staying." The clerk frowned. "Which room?" 428. The clerk's face went pale. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "Yes, it's haunted or something." The clerk hesitated before saying, "That room isn't supposed to be occupied. We don't book it anymore. Years ago, a young boy died there during a family vacation. He was playing hide and seek and got locked in the closet. By the time they found him..." She trailed off, her expression grim. Hannah stared at her, speechless. "I'm so sorry," the clerk added. "I didn't think anyone would experience anything." Without another word, Hannah walked out, her hand shaking as she gripped her keys. The cold night air was a welcome relief. She drove off, vowing never to stay in an unfamiliar hotel again. But as she merged onto the highway, her phone buzzed one last time. "Come back and play." Angela and Mark had been looking forward to their weekend getaway for months. Life in the city had become too fast, too loud, and too exhausting. When Angela found a deal for a stay at a historic boutique hotel nestled in the countryside, she jumped at the chance. Mark was skeptical at first. He wasn't a fan of old places with creaking floors and antique furniture, but Angela convinced him by promising tranquility and good food. The hotel, a grand Victorian mansion converted into a 20-room inn, sat on a hill surrounded by dense woods. Its ornate facade, with tall windows and intricate woodwork, looked like something out of a period drama. As the couple pulled into the gravel driveway, Angela leaned forward, her face lighting up. "It's beautiful," she said, clutching Mark's arm. "It's rustic," Mark replied, suppressing a groan as he noticed the weathered paint and overgrown hedges. Inside, the charm was undeniable. The lobby was warm and inviting, with polished hardwood floors, a crackling fireplace, and vintage furniture. A receptionist, a middle-aged woman with sharp green eyes and a tight bun, greeted them from behind the counter. Her name tag read Catherine. "Welcome to the Willow Ridge Inn," Catherine said with a smile. "Checking in?" "Yes," Angela said, handing over her reservation details. Catherine typed into her computer, her smile faltering slightly. "Ah, room 412. A lovely choice. It's one of our more unique rooms." Angela raised an eyebrow. "Unique how?" Catherine hesitated. "Some of our guests have mentioned, unusual experiences in that room." Nothing harmful, of course, just curious occurrences. Mark rolled his eyes. Let me guess, it's haunted? Catherine's smile tightened. We like to think of it as having character. Angela grinned. Well, I love a good ghost story. Mark muttered something under his breath about gimmicks and superstitions, but they took the key and headed upstairs. The room was spacious but unmistakably old. Faded floral wallpaper adorned the walls, and the furniture looked like it had been there since the 1800s. A large, four-poster bed dominated the space, its dark wood frame polished to a shine. The room had a faint scent of lavender, though it couldn't quite mask the underlying musk of age. This is amazing, Angela said, twirling around. It feels like stepping back in time. Mark shrugged. It's fine, I guess, as long as the Wi-Fi works. After unpacking, they headed to the hotel's dining room for dinner. The food was excellent. Roasted duck for Angela, a hearty steak for Mark. The waiter, a cheerful young man named Liam, regaled them with stories about the hotel's history. Room 412, huh? Liam said, raising an eyebrow when they mentioned their accommodations. That's one of our more talked-about rooms. Angela leaned in, intrigued. Why? What's the story? Liam glanced around before lowering his voice. Back in the 1930s, a woman named Eleanor stayed there. She was a regular guest, but one night she just disappeared. No one knows what happened to her. Guests say her spirit lingers in the room, watching. Watching? Mark scoffed. Sounds like a ploy to scare tourists. Liam shrugged. Believe what you want. But if you see anything unusual, don't be surprised. That night, as they settled into bed, Angela couldn't help but feel a little thrill of excitement. She'd always been fascinated by ghost stories, and the idea of staying in a haunted room was more exhilarating than frightening. Mark, on the other hand, was less enthused. It's just a story to drum up business, he said, pulling the covers up to his chest. Maybe, Angela replied, turning off the bedside lamp. But wouldn't it be fun if it wasn't? The room plunged into darkness. The old radiator hissed softly and the wind outside whispered against the windows. Angela drifted off quickly, but Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sometime in the early hours, Mark woke with a start. His chest felt heavy, as though something was pressing down on him. He tried to move but found himself paralyzed. Panic surged through him as his eyes darted around the room. That's when he saw it. In the corner near the window stood a shadowy figure. It was tall and indistinct, but its presence was undeniable. Mark tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure seemed to watch him, unmoving, until it slowly dissolved into the darkness. The pressure lifted, and Mark sat up, gasping for air. Angela stirred beside him. "What's wrong?" she mumbled. "Nothing," Mark lied, his voice shaky. "Just a bad dream." The next morning, Mark didn't mention what he'd seen. He convinced himself it had been sleep paralysis, a phenomenon he'd read about but never experienced. Angela, oblivious to his unease, spent the day exploring the hotel and taking pictures. That night, Mark double-checked the locks on the door and window before climbing into bed. He told himself it was just to be safe, but deep down, he felt a lingering dread. At 2:47 a.m., Angela woke to the sound of running water. She groggily turned on the bedside lamp and looked toward the bathroom. The door was ajar, and light spilled out into the room. "Mark?" she whispered, but he was fast asleep beside her. Angela swung her legs over the side of the bed and padded toward the bathroom. As she reached for the doorknob, the water abruptly stopped. She hesitated, her hand trembling, before pushing the door open. The sink was dripping, but what caught her attention was the mirror. Written in the fogged glass, As though traced by an invisible finger were the words, "Get out." Angela gasped, stumbling backward. She ran back to the bed, shaking Mark awake. "What is it?" He groaned. "Look," she cried, pointing toward the bathroom. But when Mark got up and checked, the message was gone. "You probably imagined it," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Angela didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Angela insisted they speak to Catherine at the front desk. "Did you have any incidents last night?" Catherine asked, her tone cautious. Angela described the writing on the mirror, while Mark reluctantly mentioned the shadowy figure he'd seen the night before. Catherine listened intently, her expression unreadable. "You're not the first guest to report such things," she admitted. "Room 412 has always been active. Some say it's Eleanor, the woman who disappeared. Others think it's something older, tied to the land. Whatever it is, it doesn't like company." Angela and Mark decided they'd had enough. They packed their bags and left, cutting their weekend getaway short. As they drove away, Angela glanced back at the hotel, its tall windows gleaming in the sunlight. She thought she saw a figure standing in the window of room 412, watching them leave. But when she blinked, it was gone. In the years that followed, Angela and Mark rarely spoke about their experience. But neither of them could forget the feeling of being watched, the undeniable presence in the room. And room 412 remained unoccupied, except for those brave enough to stay. The Crestwood Manor Hotel was a jewel of Victorian elegance nestled deep in the English countryside. Its sprawling grounds, ivy-covered walls, and ornate turrets spoke of a bygone era of sophistication and charm. But beneath its refined facade lay whispers of the unexplained, strange occurrences that every employee and many guests swore were more than rumors. Amelia had heard these stories all her life. Growing up in the nearby village, she had passed the hotel countless times on her way to school, always drawn to its mysterious allure. When she turned 21 and applied for her first job as a front desk receptionist, she was thrilled to be hired. The job came with its perks: free lodging in the staff quarters, a steady paycheck, and, of course, proximity to the hotel's haunted history. Among the numerous tales that floated around the hotel, one stood out above all: the legend of the Phantom Maid. The story went that in the early 1900s, a maid named Beatrice had worked at the Crestwood Manor Hotel. Beatrice was diligent, kind-hearted, and well-liked by staff and guests alike. But her life came to a tragic end one fateful night when a wealthy and influential guest accused her of stealing a priceless brooch. Despite her protests of innocence, Beatrice was dismissed on the spot and thrown out of the hotel in the dead of winter. No one knows what happened to her afterward, but weeks later, her lifeless body was found in a nearby river, frozen and pale, still wearing her uniform. The brooch, it turned out, had been misplaced and was later discovered in the accuser's luggage. Beatrice's name was cleared, but the damage had been done. From that day forward, guests and staff reported seeing a spectral figure of a maid roaming the hallways, her face a mixture of sorrow and fury. Some claimed she was searching for justice. Others believed she sought revenge. Amelia, though intrigued, dismissed the stories as local lore. She didn't believe in ghosts, and even if she did, she doubted a spirit would linger in a hotel for over a century. Her first few weeks on the job were uneventful. Amelia quickly learned the rhythms of the hotel, the bustling breakfasts, the quiet afternoons, and the late-night arrivals of weary travelers. The staff were friendly enough, though they all had their own quirks. George, the night manager, was a superstitious man who refused to walk past the laundry room after dark. Edith, an older housekeeper, claimed to have seen Beatrice's ghost twice during her decades of service. It wasn't until her first overnight shift that Amelia began to question her skepticism. The evening had started like any other. Rain pattered against the tall windows as guests retreated to their rooms after dinner. By midnight, the lobby was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old building settling. Amelia sat at the front desk, sipping tea and scrolling through the hotel's booking system. She had just finished updating the reservations for the following week when she heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound coming from the hallway behind her. Swish, swish, swish. It sounded like someone dragging a mop across the wooden floor. Amelia frowned. The cleaning staff had gone home hours ago and George was on his break. Rising from her seat, she grabbed her flashlight and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice echoing slightly, the sound stopped. Amelia shone her flashlight down the corridor. The light revealed nothing unusual, just the same Victorian decor she had walked past dozens of times. She shook her head and turned back toward the lobby, but as she did, she caught a glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision. A figure, dressed in a long, dark dress and apron, disappeared around the corner. Amelia's heart raced. "Wait, who's there?" She hurried after the figure, her footsteps echoing loudly. Rounding the corner, she found herself in front of the laundry room. The door was ajar, and the faint smell of lavender soap wafted out. Amelia hesitated. She didn't like the laundry room. It was cold, windowless, and cluttered with old equipment that hadn't been used in decades. Still, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. "Hello?" she called again. The room was empty, but as she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A single, wet footprint on the tiled floor. The next morning, Amelia confided in Edith. The older woman listened intently, her expression grave. "You've seen her," Edith said. "Seen who?" "Beatrice. The Phantom Maid. She always appears near the laundry room. Used to be her favorite place to work, they say, but she doesn't show herself without a reason." Amelia laughed nervously. "I'm sure it was just my imagination." Edith shook her head. "Mark my words, Amelia. If she's made herself known to you, she'll come again." Over the next few nights, Amelia tried to put the encounter out of her mind. But strange things kept happening. One evening, as she tidied the reception desk, she found an old maid's cap folded neatly atop the guest ledger. No one had been behind the desk except her. Another time, she came back from her break to find all the chairs in the lobby turned to face the same direction, as though someone had arranged them for an unseen audience. The final straw came a week later, during another overnight shift. Amelia was locking up the dining room when she heard soft sobbing coming from the grand staircase. She froze. The sound was faint but unmistakable. A woman's muffled cries. Steeling herself, she climbed the stairs, her heart pounding with each step. At the top, she saw her. A translucent figure kneeling by the banister, her shoulders shaking with sorrow. The woman's face was pale and drawn, her dark hair pulled back beneath a maid's cap. "Beatrice?" Amelia whispered. The figure turned to look at her, and Amelia gasped. The maid's eyes were hollow, her mouth twisted in anguish. She raised a trembling hand and pointed down the hallway toward room 309. Before Amelia could react, the figure vanished. Terrified but compelled, Amelia approached room 309. The door was slightly ajar, though she was certain no guests had checked into that room that night. Pushing it open, she was hit by a blast of cold air. The room was dark, save for the moonlight streaming through the window. On the bed lay an old, tarnished brooch, the kind you'd expect to see in a museum. Amelia's blood ran cold. It matched the description of the brooch from Beatrice's story. As she reached for it, a voice whispered in her ear, "Justice!" Amelia screamed and fled the room, leaving the brooch behind. The next day, she told George and Edith everything. George dismissed her story as a prank, but Edith's expression was one of grim understanding. "You've found her truth," Edith said. "Beatrice won't rest until her name is truly cleared. That brooch is the key." Together, they contacted a local historian who had written about the hotel's past. The historian was thrilled when they described the brooch and came to the hotel immediately. He confirmed that it was, indeed, the missing brooch from Beatrice's story. News of the discovery spread quickly. The Crestwood Manor Hotel held a small ceremony in Beatrice's honor, displaying the brooch in a glass case with a plaque that told her story. Afterward, the strange occurrences seemed to stop. Guests no longer reported cold drafts or eerie voices, and the staff felt a sense of peace in the hallways, but Amelia would never forget the sorrowful figure she had seen that night, or the overwhelming feeling that, for the first time in decades, Beatrice was finally at rest.